Well, welcome back to Through the Eyes of Survivors. So, what if we could predict which abusers are most likely to kill and stop it before it happens? What if our courts didn't just respond after violence occurs, right? But actively prevent it by understanding the psychology of batterers? Today's guest has dedicated over 40 years to making that vision a reality, from lethality assessments to reshaping how our justice system views domestic violence. Perpetrators, Michael Gorch, um, has been in the front lines. So, saving lives with science, advocacy, and truth. This episode isn't just about uh, what we've gotten wrong, it's about what we must do right, because mislabeling abuse can cost lives. So, let's dig into these patterns, the red flags, and the real solutions.
Important notice: the following content may be triggering. Viewer discretion is advised. All discussions are based on personal opinions and experiences. If you or someone you know needs help, please reach out to a local support organization.
All right, welcome to Through the Eyes of Survivors. Before we get into our topic today, I want to thank all our affiliates out there, starting with Truthfinder. I want to take a quick moment to tell you about Truthfinder. It can really empower your journey towards safety and healing. It's a simple tool that helps you uncover public records and background information about people that you may encounter in your life, whether you're reconnecting with someone from your past or just want to ensure that the people around you are trustworthy. Truthfinder provides you with the information you need to make informed decisions. And here at Through the Eyes of Survivors, we are all about finding safe spaces and giving survivors tools that they need to reclaim the power in their lives. And so please be sure to check out Truthfinder. There will be a link in our description box where you can sign up and thank you for supporting the mission there. Also, we want to thank Opus Clips. Opus Clip is an AI driven platform that helps turn powerful podcasts like this one into short, impactful clips. From survivor stories to hard truths, Opus Clips helps amplify voices. So please, if you want to turn your content into some great reels, check them out. The link is in the description as well. And our last affiliate is the Self Defense Keychain Store. Um, this affiliate with Through the Eyes of Survivors, this business is powered by women who are committed to empowering individuals with practical, discreet, and stylish self defense tools. And by shopping through our affiliate link, you're not only investing in your personal safety, but you're supporting our mission and amplifying the voices of survivors. So use the code Break the Silence for 10% off and help us out there. So today, we are honored and welcomed Michael to Through the Eyes of Survivors podcast. Michael has served as a senior probation officer at the New Orleans Municipal Court and is the founder of Louisiana's first court based program dedicated to handling domestic violence cases. With over 40 years of experience, Michael has conducted more than 50,000 lethality assessments for New Orleans City Attorney's Office. He's Recognized nationally as a leading expert and trainer on understanding the behaviors of abusive men. And Michael is the author of 2 books and over 30 essays on battering. He has even advised Dear Abby readers and continues to educate others, even in retirement. So, today, we're going to dive into his groundbreaking blame model and the evolution of the courts and what it takes to truly stop violence before it turns deadly. So, thank you, Michael, for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a privilege.
Oh, thank you. So, Michael, I would love for the audience to get a little background on how you got started um, doing all of this with lethality and assessments. Woo, get that out.
Um, Interestingly, I got to go back to when I was 18 years of age and I was on a date. A guy followed us home and pulled the victim out the car and beat her severely and jumped in the car with a knife, with a gun and held it to my head. And that was my first encounter with these type of males. So that was only until I was 18 years old. So that was the beginning of my interest. And then I started working in the courts in the mid 1970s. And the judge asked me, Mike, would you check on this case? In those days, they really didn't call them domestic violence cases. They just saw them as civil matters. They did put any focus at all. So I took the case in the back with the city attorney prosecutor. And as I began to Janice, I saw all kind of red flags. Instinctively, I knew she was in danger. And I gave her my card. The city attorney told her and the perpetrator to go to civil court and resolve it over there. Well, I gave her my court card. And she took it home. We didn't even do a restraining order in those days. This is the mid 70s. And the next day I had a call from a police officer who was on the scene. The perpetrator had scalped her with a knife and used a set of nunchucks to sever her vocal cord. And I visited Janice in the hospital a week later. She survived the attack. And I was just stunned at what he had done to her. And between that, when I was 18 years old, obviously I acquired an interest in why do men do these things?
Right.
So I started screening these cases very closely. And after I did 2,000 or 3,000 assessments, I started realizing these men were not all one and the same. They differed in frequency of abuse, how often it occurred, magnitude of abuse, how serious it was when it did occur. They differed in potential lethality, psychopathology, remorse, and treatability. So when all these issues I began to recognize, I had lunch with a friend of mine who was a psychiatrist. I said, Doc, explain the differences in these men. Some of them, when I speak to the victim says it's never happened before, while some of them say that it happens habitually. And some of them say that it's more psychological, emotional abuse, but a little physical abuse. So I told Doc that I'm starting to recognize the differences, but explain to me in clinical terms, what am I dealing with? And so Doc gave me the DSM-3, which is your psychiatric Bible of diagnosis. And he said, read the chapter on personality disorders. And I did, and bingo. I started recognizing that habitual abusers, most of them were personality disorders, while the others were less clinically involved with that diagnosis, and some were relatively normal people. So I started looking at it very closely, wondering, how do I put this on a plane that shows the least dangerous to the most dangerous? And And what I did is I created what they called in that time and reference is the batterers continuum.
Okay.
Category one being the least dangerous, and victims would say it never happened before. And of course, I could feel they were in denial, but I could validate that through their adult children, through the police officers, through friends. So there were some in which this was a first time offense. And then on the other extreme of the continuum was category three. Category threes, the victims would say it happens all the time. I can't remember where one begins and one ends, and
Right.
uses weapons, and he's put me in a hospital, and that was very concerning to me because courts were not recognizing the difference in these men. And I should say the class twos, category twos, victims would say it's more psychological, emotional, with some sporadic physical violence.
Right.
So, I'm sorry.
I said right. Yeah, I was agreeing.
So, I published the first book, which was called The Battering Syndrome, and also a self-help book called He Promised He'd Stop, to look at these three categories. And basically the current book, From Love to Fear, has changed the term of the batterers continuum to the blame model. Blame meaning batterers lethality assessment model evaluator. That's a mouthful.
Yes.
But the blame model is basically a current assessment tool to the first one called the batterers continuum. And people will say, how do you determine where the batterer fits on this linear plane? Well, there's numerous tools you can use, and they're cumulative when you use them. First of all, interviews. If you interview the victim, sometimes she'll be in denial, but you can also interview her friends, her parents, adult children particularly, because they want to share what she's been through.
Right.
So, and even interviews can include police officers who have been out there many times before. The second area that you can use to determine how dangerous the guy is prior relationships. You know, usually somebody will tell you, yeah, he did it to his previous girlfriend or one before. Another tool is police records. Police records are very often available along with court records if somebody goes to a civil court or a criminal court and asks for a certain file on a perpetrator, on an individual. Those records are extremely revealing because not only do they have the guy's record in them, which is sometimes available to the public, but they also have reports in there that are very detailed. A fifth area that you can look at in terms of assessing the danger, has he ever used weapons? And usually people are very vocal on that. Obviously, the police could tell you that as well.
Yeah.
A sixth area is drugs. Is he alcoholic or is he a substance abuser? A seventh area is medical histories. You can look at the medical records of not only the woman in terms of some of her medical interventions she went through because of the abuse, but also sometimes you can get a hold of psychiatric records of the perpetrator. Not often because of HIPAA laws, but sometimes you do have access to that by them just giving it to you. And when those psychiatric diagnoses speak the words personality disorder, then his potential lethality goes up significantly. Another area is photos. Women very often would bring their photographic evidence of bruises and other severe injuries that happened before. And then a very significant area that we're all have access to is text messages or email messages that the perpetrator has sent to the victim, prior to and after leaving the relationship. And many of those text messages go from hysterical pleadings to come back to, when she doesn't come back, to avert threats to kill her or to harm her. Another area is the internet. You can put a guy's name on the internet and Google the perpetrator, and you might pull up all sorts of revealing activities he's been involved in. And then the most important area of doing an assessment evaluation is monitoring his behavior.
Right.
And after he's been brought to court, for abusing his spouse. Now, I should sum this up by saying, and I call it the lethal three. If he's been involved with drugs, weapons, and violence in his past, I call that the lethal three. Because if he has the use of weapons and drugs and violence simultaneously, he potentially able to kill her. But I should sum this up by saying that you can't predict lethality. You can only forecast it. Just like major hurricanes, you can't predict that a Category 1 or Category 4 will be lethal, but you can forecast the fact that Category 3 or 4 storms are more dangerous, potentially more lethal than Category 1s. And I sum my statements up by saying this: lethality assessment is not a science, it's an art. Again, you can't predict, you can only forecast. But anybody having access to the tools I just mentioned can they don't have to be a professional in this field, but if they have the tools, they can do their own assessment relative to what type of help they give to a victim.
Yes, and those assessments are very telling because I have been a big proponent of the assessments and first responders and the court systems using those since the death of my daughter, um, and I will tell you that they're very eye opening if you sit and take one. And I got to go through it after the fact, and I think we would have been a little more prepared, not just her, but as a family, for what we were really looking at and trying to get her out and get her out safely, if we would have had that tool available to us to go through and use before we started really trying to hide her, help her, keep her safe, uh, to really know what we were dealing with, because we really didn't have a clue how dangerous he was. So,
It's very unfortunate that courts, even today, after 40 years, 50 years of looking at these problems in a very, very serious way, after 40 years, most courts still use the one-size-fits-all approach. They treat all batterers as one the same in terms of what they do with them, how they protect the victim, when they refer them out. They don't see the differences in most cases. Some courts do, but I think that's the minority. And by using the one-size-fits-all approach, very often, more often than not, serial batterers get sent to lethality programs, batterers intervention groups like Boy Scouts who need a guidance counseling. These batterers intervention groups are, and research, validates this, are relatively unsuccessful in changing the behavior of these men. Now, you got to realize batterers that are sent to these groups generically, some of them are Category 1s. And I may say this about Category 1s. They never did it before. They'll probably never do it again. It's related to some major trauma in their life. And they reacted in a very inappropriate way. Maybe the death of their child, which I knew one particular case was related to, or some catastrophic loss due to maybe Hurricane Katrina. I saw that happen in one case. And these men, class ones, are sent by the courts to treatment programs where they shouldn't be there. They should be sent to trauma specialists who specialize in their particular issue of concern. Now, in saying that, the two groups that usually get sent to batterers intervention groups are sporadic batterers and serial batterers, class 2 and class 3. Now, class 3 should not be sent to these groups. Class 3s should be incarcerated. They should be giving the maximum penalty allowed by law. I mean, class 3s, the serial batterers, are extremely dangerous. But again, generically, the one-size-fits-all approach, courts send them to these treatment programs on a regular basis. And then the only people that should be allowed that privilege, because it is a privilege, are class 2s that don't have an extreme history. They're not seriously dangerous, even though could be under certain circumstances, but they should be allowed to go to these programs. And if they complete them, then keep them on probation for a while, monitor them. If they don't complete them, then bring them back, revoke their probation, incarcerate them. I'm very concerned because these batterers intervention groups around the country, they're more educational programs, and they deal with sexism and learned behavior, and that's fine with certain men, but that is not fine with people who have serious personality disorders and they are serial abusers. That type of program does not change them in any way. In fact, in some cases, it makes them better batterers because they learn how to manipulate more. Serial batterers should never be sent to these programs. Yet, I would think half of the perpetrators sent to batterers intervention groups are serial batterers, unfortunately. And I was shocked to go online the other day and realize that perpetrators of that magnitude can do online programs now, online, on the computer. Now, these people who are sociopaths, they can go online and get a certificate showing that they completed the batterers intervention groups. And that's absolutely ridiculous. It really is.
No, that's a part of what needs to be reformed, definitely in our justice system, because when they're allowing that for extreme cases like that, and like I said, I'm a survivor as well, so I can tell by what you're saying. I definitely, with my ex, was probably a class 2. It was more verbal, with occasional. I always called them. It was a holiday. Holidays always brought out the worst, and I could pretty much expect during the holiday there was going to be some kind of a physical altercation. But most of the time it was just verbal. But what my daughter went through is definitely, uh, I mean, he ticked every box there was. And so to think that someone like him could actually just do that kind of thing through an online course is very disturbing.
And unfortunately, sending habitual batterers to these groups by the courts are more the rule than the exception. And the reason courts do this is because the floodgates open in the late 70s, where pro-arrest and mandatory arrest policies brought these guys before the court in numbers never ever seen. The courts saw the floodgates opening and started looking for alternatives because they couldn't prosecute them all. They couldn't incarcerate them all. Right. So when the clinicians came in and say, hey, we got the answer. We're going to start these groups. You can refer them to us. You can divert them to us. Or if they're on probation, you can send them to us. And we're going to solve your problem. Well, they may have solved the problem of the magnitude of numbers for the court. But they didn't solve the problem relative to protecting the victim. Look, these treatment programs for serial abusers, they give false hope to the victim.
Yes.
And that lures the victim back into the relationship. The batterer learns how to be a better batterer and manipulator. And consequently, these treatment programs don't really help the victim. They harm her. They put her in greater danger. And again, you mentioned your husband, your former husband being a class 2. Now, if class 2s, refer to these programs, I have no problem with that. But they should be closely monitored for the 26 or 52 weeks that they are involved. Should be monitored by the court. And a woman should never, ever return, even if she's inclined to do so, until they finish the program completely and they have showed a displayed major change, which often is the case. When I was in the municipal courts, I did my own personal study of about 300 referrals. Half of those were sporadic, category 2s, half of those were category 3 serial. And what I wanted to see in these referrals, how many of these guys actually finished the program?
Right.
And I was really surprised that 75% of my class 3s never finished. And about 40% of my class 2s didn't finish. In some cases, we were able to bring back before the court and revoke them and hold them, responsible for their lack of compliance. But some never showed up for court again, and we never seen again. So I just get very concerned of how these programs are used by the courts. And until they recognize they're not protecting victims by these treatment programs, for the most part, they're setting them up. I'm going to be very, very concerned.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Michael, we're going to take a quick break here for just a second to talk to our listeners about Break the Silence has a store that you can shop online. And so we're going to play a quick clip about our store, and we will return in just 1 minute with Michael Grutch and talking more about courts and lethality assessments.
We hope you're enjoying this episode of Through the Eyes of Survivors. We wanted to pause for a moment and let you know that Through the Eyes of Survivors has a shop now open. And this is a great way for you to not only help survivors of domestic violence, but also let everyone know that you will not be silent about this important cause. From t-shirts to bags to coffee mugs, we have so much to choose from. To grab your swag, head to our store at breakthesilencedv.org. That's store.breakthesilencedv.org. We can't say enough about how much we appreciate all that the community does to help support us and this organization. So we hope you've enjoyed this episode and continue to subscribe to future episodes. Thank you.
All right, we're back, and we're talking with Michael Grutch about uh, definitely about assessing abusers and lethality assessments. And so, Michael, we were talking about the courts and their attitudes and that. Now, I see some states are starting to take this seriously with some legislation and mandating that their first responders and court systems are um, starting to use this in some of their training and having to use it when they respond. But I definitely would love to see more of us kind of be sure that these assessments are put into the court documents and judges start using them to help evaluate these different levels that we were talking about. So that way, offenders aren't mislabeled as to what we're dealing with within the system here. Have you seen any changes like that happening over the years?
That's a very interesting question. We've been talking about this for 50 years now, because again, the battered women's movement started in probably the mid 70s in Boston. The first shelter was in California in 1964, but the movement started in Boston, and then it spread to Minnesota, and then in the late 70s, I went to the first meeting here in the South at the YWCA's program to look at this problem, to see what we could do to hopefully, advocate for victims in a much more significant way. And when I went to that meeting, I remember it was only myself and a judge friend of mine. He was running for the judgeship at that point. And before that meeting, municipal court, like other courts, never looked at these issues as criminal issues, just civil matters. And the police would go on call, and they called it arrest avoidance. They would actually try to play peacemaker, tell the guy to go take a walk.
Yes. Yes. I've been on the receiving end of that discussion. I definitely know. Yeah, my ex was told to take a walk. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was prior to 1975. And you mentioned change. Well, after 1975, they started promoting pro-arrest, mandatory arrest policies, and pro-prosecution policies. But I'll be honest, it's been 50 years and we're still talking about it. Most of these guys aren't prosecuted. The majority, the greatest percentage, again, are sent to treatment programs that are virtually ineffective for habituals and somewhat ineffective with sporadic. So have I seen any major change since 75? I hate to say it. In most cases, I have not. In some cases, I have, but courts still, as I said earlier, treat these guys as all one and the same. They don't use lethality assessment, and it amazes me after 5 decades that still isn't being employed. Now, if I go back to the 1970s, 3 to 4 women a day were murdered by men who claimed to love them.
Right.
Well, I go back to 2025, or fast forward to 2025, the numbers are still 3 to 4 a day are murdered by men who are in intimate relationships with them. And that's, sad to say. So have I seen much change over the last 50 years? Unfortunately not. When I went online recently and wrote this book, I was really taken by how many shelters exist in this country and how many programs for women exist. It was significant. But the movement itself to talk about this and to promote better legislation, it's still very, very weak, unfortunately.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you there. What's one reform you believe that every state should implement that would help reduce maybe the numbers for domestic violence homicides?
Every state should promote and begin pro-arrest policies, as opposed to mandatory arrest. Mandatory arrest, unfortunately, victims get arrested very often in mandatory arrest, because if one has bruises or scratches, whether they be offensive or defensive, both of them are subject to be arrested. Pro-arrest tells police basically that if you can determine domestic violence has occurred in this home, determine who primary aggressor is, and you want to arrest the primary aggressor, not somebody who is defending themselves. So the first thing this country should do nationally is pro-arrest in every state and every city for domestic violence victims. Secondly, when they go into the courtroom, eliminate serial batterers being referred to these treatment programs and incarcerate. And so pro-prosecution is definitely, in order. And unfortunately, most of these cases are either diverted, dismissed, or sent, for probation or treatment program. That must change. We must get very firm with dealing with these men. Yeah, I'm going to analogize 3 serial groups.
Okay.
The serial rapist not only rapes, but they batter and kill. The serial killer not only kills, but he batters and rapes. The serial batterer that I'm speaking about not only batters, but he rapes and kills more women than the other 2 groups involved. I've been promoting the term serial batterer now for 50 years. Still doesn't, it still isn't spoken in anybody's narrative. It's like they're all one and the same, and they're not very serious. Serial batterers are the most dangerous men that walk and stalk the homes and the streets of America. And so if you ask what change should be made, they should recognize the differences. They should address the differences, and they should protect victims like they would protect other victims of violence, but they unfortunately have not.
Yes, and I like that. A serial batterer, definitely. That is definitely something I think should be promoted.
Have you ever heard of that term?
No, I have not. And like I said, with my daughter's case, he would have classified as that. She was like number 8 of people he'd been charged with. All of them were either ex-wives, ex-girlfriends, and then one was his sister-in-law. And yet he was still out there. So he was definitely the definition of a serial batterer, and the police knew it.
You've never heard that term before.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that. Mm-mm.
And then I have to ask why. I mean, we live in a very misogynist society, and again, you asked about change. I know I'm not going to be popular about saying it, but the system, both from the police perspective, the court system, and the treatment perspective, has been virtually ineffective in protecting these victims.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. It has been very ineffective. So can you maybe share a case that you know of where intervention actually did save a life? Because I just haven't seen that. And with what you were saying, it really doesn't happen. And a lot of people have false hope out there that these programs can help.
Yeah, they are. They ignore the obvious, and clinicians. I don't want to make them sound like devious people, because they're not. They many of them do a tremendous job in protecting women by treating class 2 batterers. I have a friend of mine, Joe Blanco. She's been doing it all her life, her adult life, and she's done tremendous work. And she's probably, as a result, saved a lot of victims during her life. And then Dr. Lucille Perry, that used to be on my team in municipal court, she was the best victim advocate I've ever met, and probably, again, saved a lot of lives. But clinicians just got to wake up and say, wait a minute, if I have a serial batterer in my group, I need to refer them back to the court that referred them to me, because I can't treat his pathology. I can't change his pathology, and the courts must deal with him appropriately. So have I ever seen a woman that came out of this? Yes, I've seen many in my life. I've seen victims come to us, 10, 15 years later, thanking us for our intervention. Dr. Perry was wonderful with these victims. They would come back and give her a hug and tell her how much gratitude they had towards her for doing what Dr. Perry did. So yeah, I have seen some real good stories. I really have.
Good. Yeah. And so, like, what do you think are some of the most immediate red flags um, that can be displayed for someone that their abuse may be escalating to where homicide could potentially be involved if they're leaving?
A huge red flag is when they violate restraining orders, protective orders, stay away orders. When when they have a stay away order issued by a court and they ignore it and they continue to pursue her, that's a real serious red flag regarding lethality, because they're not even fearful of consequence of violating that order, which means incarceration in most cases. And when that individual also, again, if I go to lethal 3, when he employs weapons, he uses drugs, and he's got a history of violence, and he's violating the protective order, that's a huge group of red flags, and he should be dealt with very aggressively by the police and the courts.
Yes. And I know some of the other ones for listeners out there, if strangulation is involved and if they're harming your pets, that's other huge red flags, correct?
When a woman when she's entering a relationship with a guy and she sees he hates her pets, he hates animals, absolutely she needs to look at that trait. I would run the other way if I ever met anybody in a relationship who hated my dog. So yes, there are early red flags as well. Yeah, if a woman is questioning somebody who approached her and wanted to date her, hey, I'm not against going on Google, on the internet, and running his name and look at him real close, particularly if he's accelerating a relationship and he wants to develop a relationship quicker than normally does. Or he's a little more possessive than others. Yeah. The internet gives you a lot of information you'd have otherwise. And that's not being unethical. I mean, I check out when I had rental property, I would check out clients before I rented to them because I didn't want to get involved in dysfunctional relationships. So yeah, the internet is a great way of looking at this closely.
Absolutely. Now, I know in a previous conversation we had, we talked some about um, the lethality of cases with pregnant women who are experiencing abuse as well. So I'd love to touch on that some with some of our listeners as well. What is some of the statistics and things you found with that?
I was shocked at how many cases I handled involving pregnant women, particularly in the late stage of pregnancy. I was stunned that some of these guys would not only beat them but punch them in the stomach. And when I had to look at the reasoning behind that, I always felt it was two. One, most of these men are very narcissistic. They don't want to compete for attention. So if they eliminate the baby, then they eliminate, that fear that they have of not being the primary source of attention from the victim, because the baby now doesn't exist. The second reason why I believe perpetrators beat pregnant women is they don't want a responsibility. I mean, it's a great responsibility when that child is born, and if they eliminate it, then they won't have to deal with that responsibility. And then the third reason is basically it's the ultimate act of power and control.
Yeah.
There's no act of power than to kill the unborn child. So, those are basically the three reasons they beat pregnant women. And And again, the court should look at that seriously more than any other case in terms of protecting both the woman and the unborn child.
Yes, because I've been a big proponent, and it won't go. It hasn't gone anywhere so far with the lawmakers that I've discussed with. Is that um, we tried very hard to create a law. They had one written up in Oklahoma for it, but it didn't go anywhere. Um, that was going to be named after my daughter, of like protecting, like, your protective order covering your child once it's born if you've had any kind of violence um, during your pregnancy of that type, because essentially they have tried to kill that child already. And
Absolutely, that's not. They know exactly what they're doing, and beating a pregnant woman should be a major felony.
mhm.
I don't care how little the battery was, or if she wasn't injured. If you beat a pregnant woman, it should be a major felony. And that's another area of legislation they need to look at. But let me warn you on something about making all these cases state misdemeanors or felonies.
Yes.
You need a triage system in handling domestic violence cases. City courts that handle city misdemeanors and state courts that handle more serious misdemeanors and felonies. Because if you don't have a triage system, then what happens on very, very minor cases, if the police officer has to send all these cases to state court, a lot of them just write up as a call for service, and they don't arrest the perpetrator. I once, in the city of New Orleans, we had three systems. Um, Minor cases to moderate cases came to city court. Moderate cases to more serious cases went to state court,
Mhm.
and they could refer back and forth. But they eliminated municipal court handling any domestic violence case. That's where I worked at. And they sent them all to state court, and the police I knew well said, Mike, we just don't charge minor offenses anymore. We just write them up as a call for service and do a report and leave. And so they should have a triage system where minor cases will be addressed, because a lot of those minor cases are committed by major offenders, and they should not walk the other way because it was so insignificant in terms of that particular event.
Yes, because I remember back a few years ago, I want to say it was about 8 or 9 years ago, um, the the whole, social media communities were just raving that finally all 50 states now made animal abuse a felony. And yet I was so saddened by that, because I know from working here in the system and everything, it's not that way for women. Not all 50 states is abuse of a woman or a child a felony, but it is for animals. And I think animals should not be abused, definitely, but it said to me that our lives were worth less than our pets. And that to
Yeah,
me is horrifying.
yeah, and I agree. That's an amazing element of hypocrisy, you know. Um, but I caution systems booking all these men as felons, because what
Right.
happens is the police have to gather significant evidence, and they
Right.
got to do tremendous follow up with the district attorney's offices on felonies, and if they're not allowed to book some of these men on that, do it on a marginal basis in city court, then they just walk away. Now, with
Mhm.
animals, probably the same thing. I know we handle cruelty to animals in municipal court, and serious offenses involving animals, we go to state court. So I promote triage on both humans and animals. I think
Yeah.
knowing the differences in the systems, it's in the best interest of both women and animals.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I know we're coming close to the end of our time here, but for advocates and survivors listening, what's the one takeaway you hope they leave with today?
Knowing when to leave and designing a safety plan before, doing, and after.
Mhm.
Safety planning is critical to their survival and getting out, particularly with serial offenders. Um, Category ones, victims, they really don't need a safety plan. Again, those are offenders. They're not really batterers. They have never done it before. Most of it was emotional at a specific time in their life when they acted inappropriately. So with category one offenders, I call them, not batterers, a safety plan isn't really necessary. Category twos, absolutely, a woman should have a safety plan before, doing, and after. And category three should not only have that safety plan before, doing, and after, but should notify the authorities, hey, I'm getting out, meaning the police that patrol their neighborhood and the court that handle them before, let them know, use their support system in terms of excavating herself from a very, very serious situation. So safety planning is my answer to that final question.
Awesome. And oh, excuse me. Mm, sorry about that, guys. I'm getting over a cold. Um, so, Michael, would you tell us the name of your books again and where people can find them?
Would you repeat? I didn't hear.
Oh, could you tell us the name of your books again and where people could find them?
The first two books I mentioned earlier were produced 25 years ago, so they may be in print on Amazon or
Okay.
on the internet, but the current one was published this year, and it's called "From Love to Fear: The Chilling Truth About Men Who Abuse Women and How to Assist Their Escape." And that can be found on Amazon.com books. And in some of the bookstores, I know we got it here at Barnes and Noble, some of the other bookstores as well, it can be ordered. It's published by Robert Reed Publishing Company out of Oregon. And like I said, it was about 3 months ago that we published it.
Wonderful. Everybody check that out. I'm sure we'll have a link in the description for you as well to be able to find that. So definitely check out Michael's work. And so, in conclusion, this episode was packed with some sobering truths and hopeful strategies. What we heard today is clear: domestic violence isn't random, it follows patterns. And when we learn to identify those patterns early, we can hopefully save lives. And if you're a survivor or advocate or ally looking for a community and healing, don't miss our upcoming episodes. And remember, we are here every week at Wednesday, 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. Before we close out, I want to personally invite you to something truly special. The Rest and Restore Virtual Somatic Healing Retreat and Fundraiser will be happening August 22nd and 23rd. This immersive weekend experience is designed to help both restorative and empower you, all while raising virtual funds for BTS ADV and the survivors that we serve. So, did you know that your trauma and stress doesn't just affect your mind? I'm sure everybody is very aware of that. But it can actually be stored as tension in your body, and that tension disrupts our natural and spontaneous flow. So during the retreat, they're going to cultivate peace of mind, self awareness, using powerful somatic practices, all from the comfort of your own home. You can practice breathing work, meditation, visualization, affirmations, and intuitive movement. They'll be doing all of that, journaling prompts, plus they'll be exploring the 12 principles of growth with every session. So, whether you're healing or supporting a loved one or simply needing to reconnect with yourself, this virtual treat is for you. You can find a registration link here in the details, in the description. Find out full details and watch our social media. We will be promoting it over the next 2 weeks. And don't miss your chance to restore your spirit while supporting survivors nationwide. Also, our Survivor to Survivor is every Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, answering real questions from real survivors just like you. If you want to submit a question, you can submit that at this email, podcast at breakthesilencedv.org. And also, don't miss our new series on TikTok called The Narc Diaries. New episodes every Wednesday and Sunday. We're working on growing our channel over there, so follow us at BTSADV7. And we would appreciate you following us. We're hoping to get at least 1,000 subscribers over there so we can actually start taking this podcast over there live and start holding some discussion panels for survivors over there as well. So until next time, stay informed, stay connected, and most of all, stay empowered. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next